Today on The State of Us, emotional overstatement and mental health in our schools and with our children. Welcome to The State of Us. I'm your host, Justin T. Weller, joined, of course, today by the one and only, the Mr. Lance L. Jackson, your senior resident historian, the friendly redneck liberal. And, we could go on and on with titles, but we are talking about the Age of Emotional Overstatement today. It was an opinion piece in the Wall Street Journal. From social media to job applications, the pressure to declare our feelings in public is turning us into gushing adolescents. We're also going to look at a mental health clinic in school. No thanks, says the school board. American teenagers are reporting severe levels of anxiety and depression, but when Connecticut moved to expand mental health services in schools, it ran into fierce opposition in one town. Lots to review, lots to talk about today, but before we dive in, Lance, we got a word of the day?
We don't. The word of the day is usually, it's a game that we like to play and inject a little humor, and there are going to be some funny things in today's show, but this topic is near and dear to my heart for a lot of different reasons. And just wasn't feeling it today. If you've got one, you can throw it out there, but I think there's a lot to talk about here. And I think it's a very emotional issue for a lot of people. And I'm interested in sharing and hearing what you have to say about it as well.
Very good. So let's talk about the Age of Emotional Overstatement then. You made a number of markups on this article, Lance, and said you had a lot to say. So where do you want to take us to begin with?
From an old musical, Fiddler on the Roof. If you're not familiar with it, you can look it up and watch it. I recommend it. The author's talking about real love, and one knew instinctively could not be claimed so quickly because it's a form of service, not lip service. And she uses the husband and wife in Fiddler on the Roof. The husband sings, "Do you love me?" A question, by the way, that the couple of 25 years of marriage had never discussed. And his wife doesn't say anything about the moon or infinity. No, she replies by listing the work she's done. "For 25 years, I've washed your clothes, cooked your meals, cleaned your house. If that isn't love, what is?" And I think that gets to the heart of what this article is saying. And that
Pun
is...
intended.
Huh?
Pun intended?
I'm not sure it's a pun, but it, ha ha ha. I get it. Sorry. I see, I told you, I'm really serious about this topic. I'm not, you're going to have to be the funny one. I know I usually bring the levity.
We're counting on me to be fun.
Yes. I usually bring the levity to the show, and I understand that. But this one, I always joke with my wife, she goes, "Do you love me?" And for years, since our kids were teenagers, I would look at her and say, "Well, I come home every night, don't I?" What else do you want from me? I go to work, I come home, I work here at home, I do this, I do that. So, that resonates with me. But the point of the article is we came from that time. And whereas that, maybe wasn't the best way to handle things, we've gone to this idea that you have to have a teenage post a selfie and, you've got love with 16 U's, and it's spelled L-U-V, so they don't even know how to spell. To beauty, exclamation point, to 3 hearts. Oh, you only put 3 hearts on it? Don't you really like it? You should have 50 hearts on it, and parents constantly saying, oh, not that they, don't love their child, but instead of just saying, "Well, I love you," they say, "Oh, I love you so much." And they tell them every 5 minutes when they walk through the room, because there's this desire or thinking that we have to tell you all the time because that will make you less stressed and feel better all the time. And the point of this author is like, is that fake love? Is this, as the author also goes on and says, "I continue to vacillate. I can't help but notice that while declarations of love are standard in ever odder context, since the 2020 COVID lockdown, otherwise trim and tidy houses have F Biden flags. And at the Oscars, Will Smith reacted violently to a joke and then spoke tearfully of love and forgiveness, perfectly encapsulating our times. So it's like, we're so hot and cold. Oh, I really love you, da 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 da. Or I hate everybody on the other side. And she goes, and it's like, is this two ends of the spectrum causing us not to have any kind of real emotional attachment to people? We either love you or hate you, and there's no in between. And does that just kind of epitomize our entire world? And hopefully you're starting to see some of this too, fits really well into why young people today, particularly teenagers, are having trouble finding their way through adolescence to adulthood, because we're sending them such mixed messages where everything's wonderful. We love you immensely. Oh, you're great. 4,000 hearts on your picture, or on your post and all of this. Or, no, we're going to take you out because you're from the other side. We're going to shoot you because you're a Democrat. We're going to shoot you because you're Republican.
Well, there's a lot of different ideas there, but one that strikes me, I was thinking about this yesterday because there was a Facebook post that I was part of or shared, and there's Facebook introduced, for those that aren't old enough to know this, your only option used to be to like a post, right? Which was the thumbs up, a thumbs up. I like this, Well, then they introduced the full set of reactions to the post. So now you can hold down on that like button and you get a range of other options. So you can give it the thumbs up, you can give it a heart, you can give it a laughing face or a crying face or a hug with a heart. Well, it's a face that's hugging a heart. So they give you some other options. On the one hand, when emojis started to come to prevalence, one of my initial thoughts was, well, this is probably a good thing, emojis, especially in text messages, because one thing that we've talked about over the years is the ability in digital communication to lose the intent of what's being said, and people can sometimes read it more harshly, or they read it in a negative tone when it was meant in a positive tone. There's just a lot of those things that happen. And so from that standpoint, when emojis first started really coming to popularity, I thought, well, this is good because this is a way for you to include a very simple, brief thing that indicates the mood in which it's being said, right? It's much like before emojis were there. You send a text message with the colon and the parentheses as a smiley face to indicate, hey, this is lighthearted. I don't want you to read it anyway, other than just I'm being friendly. However, I think the problem is, and that's to Lance's point, we've taken it so far, right? Because now it's become, like on Instagram, it's such a small subconscious thing that I think has a big impact. You double tap to like a photo, right? So you tap twice with your finger. But what happens when you, and I'm using air quotes here, like a photo? Well, it puts a heart on it. I don't know if liking something and putting a heart on something should be synonymous. I can like something and not love it. You know what I mean? And the reason, and people may be like, well, you're playing semantics and, I don't know if that really matters. The reason I think it matters is because it devalues love. And I would contend that we need more love in our society, not less. And what we're doing is cheapening the value of it by confusing it with like or appreciation, or while those things are certainly present as part of love, I also think that, again, that's part of what's leading to this sort of impassioned brutality that we're seeing on both ends of that spectrum. The over-the-top, gushing and the over-the-top visceral reaction to things is a lack, in my opinion, of love, because part of love is understanding, right? Empathy, acceptance of others. And those things aren't easy, and that's why I like you sharing that, because it's like part of it is it's not lip service, right? I can tell you for all eternity, but what do I do in my actions? Do I show you? On applications for colleges, internships, and jobs, it's not enough to be an all-state musician or varsity athlete with years of commitment that represents. Now applications all insist that you tell us about your passion. As with teenage Instagram posts, the pressure to be passionate encourages the applicant to flaunt and exaggerate, to make grandiose claims, to remain, in other words, a hyperbolic adolescent rather than taking a step toward becoming an adult capable of seeing one's own life in a broader context. Companies, too, as we are continually reminded, are passionate about client service, retirement portfolios, lawn care. Never mind that's what's actually wanted is competence. And when you think about it, a corporation bragging about its passion for the service it's providing suggests unstable, maybe even unhinged leadership. Passion by its very nature is short-lived. It flames, and then presumably the fire in the loins for supply chain optimization goes out. And while I'm not saying I agree with everything the author said there, I think there are some solid points about we've become inundated with, well, what's your passion? Well, are we really understanding what we're saying, right? You can be passionate about something, but is it reasonable to expect you to be passionate about everything? Again, if you're passionate about everything, you're not passionate about anything, because the nature of passion is that it's exceptional.
And the point is, whether it's in the workplace or with another individual or friendship, passion flames and dies. My wife and I talk all the time, being in the public school setting, about PDA, public displays of affection, and how kids are just over the top these days. The author speaks to this and says, the act of discretion around intimate relationships is how one honors these relationships. You explicitly don't put on a PDA parade because they're too important, they're too deep, they're too private. If you really care about someone, the point here is, do you have to go around announcing it to the world? Or shouldn't your actions, just the fact that you're still together and working at it, as you said, isn't that what's more important?
What does any of this have to do with children specifically and mental health in schools? Well, hopefully, as you've been listening, I think our listeners are pretty smart. They've started to pick up on how could this be a problem if we're misrepresenting emotions, overindulging in gushing, and overindulging in rage. How could that be affecting mental health? To find out, keep it here on The State of Us, and we'll be right back. More is not always better. Sometimes Lance and I fight that because there's more things to cover than we have time to cover. So we have to be selective about what we choose to spend time on. And that can be difficult because there's plenty of things that are worthy, but it's a question of what fits with what we're doing. And again, there's great examples in history of longer not always being better.
We'll go back to your school days. For some of you, hopefully that's not very long ago. For some of you like me, it might have been a long, long, long time ago.
Way back.
But at some point, I didn't actually live it, but I remember my teachers talking about the Civil War.
Oh, you weren't alive then?
And I was not alive then.
Oh, okay.
Was born after the war when my parents got together.
Okay.
But there's the great American president, Abraham Lincoln, and there was this battle in Pennsylvania called Gettysburg, and there were so many people killed at the battle that the government and President Lincoln decided to have a memorial service. And so the president traveled to Gettysburg from Washington, not that far, on a train, and there were throngs of people there because this was a big national event. And President Lincoln got up and spoke for less than 2 minutes, sat down before most of the audience ever even knew that he was standing up to speak, and they were still rustling around to get quiet. And then the keynote speaker, this is where, you're like, who? Yeah, there was a keynote speaker who spoke for
That wasn't the president.
That wasn't the president, that spoke more than 2 hours. His name was Daniel Everett. Okay? If you remember that there was a keynote speaker that wasn't the president, and you even now get an A on the test because you know that that person was Daniel Everett, whose words do we remember from their speeches? One spoke for about 2 minutes. The other spoke for more than 2 hours. Yes, folks, we're talking about the famous Gettysburg Address. And Lincoln was chastised in the media, in the newspapers along the East Coast, saying, how could he only speak for 2 minutes? But it's today considered one of the top American speeches, right along there with Martin Luther King's I Have a Dream. So sometimes saying less is actually saying more.
And I think that goes into what we're talking about. When you place 50 heart emojis, right, in a comment, the intention
Is good.
The result, though, is that it becomes a competition of, how you can best show how much you like something.
Would putting an arm around your child or your friend and giving them a hug mean more than 50 heart emojis? Which would mean more? You don't say a word. You don't do anything. You just put your arm around them and give them a hug. And don't say anything. Does that actually mean more to somebody and help them than liking their post?
Psychology tells us yes. Just from a research standpoint, there was a great project done on the biological value of a hug that lasts at least 10 seconds and the impact that has inside your brain and what your brain does to your body when that takes place. And it didn't matter, by the way, the hug, if it lasted 10 seconds, whether it was a friend, romantic partner, it was just somebody that you knew. If they gave you a hug for 10 seconds or more, those effects were profound. There didn't have to be any words, anything said, just that simple act. And before we left off, we were talking about passion and love and how we have a craze of passion right now, I think. And while, yes, people I'm sure make fun of me out there for the number of times I like to define words, I think that in this case, it is relevant because they are different. They're similar, but different. And there's a couple things that I think are very telling. First of all, passion is a noun, okay? And the first definition of it is strong and barely controllable emotion, a state of outburst of strong emotions. Similar words to this definition include rage, blind rage, temper, towering rage, a fit of anger. The other one is intense sexual love, which includes similar words as desire, lust, ardor, hunger, and finally, listed as similar, love. But notice similar, not the same thing. An intense desire or enthusiasm for something, a fervor, eagerness, zeal. Now, if we look at love, love is a noun and a verb. As a verb, it means to feel deep affection for someone, to like or enjoy something very much. As a noun, it is an intense feeling of deep affection. Similar includes fondness, tenderness, warmth, intimacy. A great interest and pleasure in something, a liking, a weakness, a partiality, a bent, a leaning, an inclination. I think those are pretty different. Passion is not necessarily a good thing, right? And I think we are trying as a society to tell people, oh, you got to be passionate. And I'm not sure that that's good. And I think that translates, Lance, right into what we're talking about next.
Right. You have to, if you have passion, you have to work to control it to be good. I've always used, and many times, I've used passion to describe something that got me in trouble in a social setting. I was passionate about it. And it ended up getting me in trouble in a social setting. So I think you have to have passion, but you have to know how to use it in a positive manner. This whole thing about schools and mental health, I don't think there are very few people out there anyway that are arguing that young people aren't having more emotional issues. Almost everybody I talk to agrees that there is a reason out there for some reason. Maybe we don't agree on the reason, and what to do about it. But we agree that there are young people are having more issues today in dealing with their emotions and dealing with the relationship with others than at any time in our history. Now, you could argue, as some do, that those emotions and feelings have always been there through generations. And we were just taught to tamp it down and keep it inside because, it's taboo to talk about mental health. And that today, mental health, as we're going to see in this article, is still taboo in many places in the United States, but it is more open and more accepting. And therein lies the question, right? Is that we're all agreeing that young people are having more trouble growing up now than ever before. But how do we go about solving that problem?
Well, one thing is you kind of highlighted two different areas, different schools of thought about the current mental health crisis, right? And there's three main things that come to mind about how people might answer this. It's always been there, right? And things are just more open now. So in other words, previous generations had their mental health struggles. They just stigmatized it, shoved it into the closet, suffered silently. Or when people did have mental health struggles, it was ignored or shamed into silence, and therefore it wasn't seen. So there's that option. There's the it's a new problem option, right? As in, it wasn't nearly as prevalent.
Unprecedented.
It is unprecedented. It is new. And it's related to any number of things. And then sort of branching off of it being a new problem or as a separate item is young people are just weak today, right? Young people are soft. So the question is, which of those is it? And here's, I guess, what I would contend for folks as we talk about
Probably the
this.
reality is what, as always?
A combination of these items.
I think so, right.
I think that there has always been mental health problems, right?
I agree.
We know.
I agree.
You can look at the oldest of historical texts available, and there's people that were nuts, and there were people that weren't nuts. They were just struggling with stuff. People have had emotional challenges.
But see, I think it's phrases like that, and you just meant it off the cuff and didn't mean anything by it. But when people say, they're nuts, that's not what we're talking about with mental health. No. It means that people are ill, right? It's mental health. Just the opposite to me. You're the big one on meanings of words, mental health and physical health. Okay. If I have a physical health issue, I go to the doctor. And for some of my physical health issues, the doctor prescribes me medicine that alters my insides so that I can still be walking around and spend time with my family. But I grew up in a time when if somebody said mental health, it's like,
those are the crazies.
There's something wrong with those people, and they need drugs to get by. No, wait a minute. Physical health, right? Dealing with my body, mental health, dealing with my emotions and my brain. Why have we, and this is a problem I've had since I was a teenager 50 years ago when I first hit that age. Why do we differentiate? Why is one seen as, well, yeah, you go to the doctor, you got a problem, you go to the doctor. Well, I take my blood pressure medicine every day. Yeah, I take my blood sugar medicine, because that leads to strokes. And of course I'd take it. Why wouldn't I? Oh, this person told me they take medicine to control their thoughts and reactions so that they can get through the day. Oh my gosh, they have anxiety and we have to be hush-hush about it.
I mean,
what's the difference? You're dealing with something and you're using chemicals or drugs to alter so that you can live a better life. Why do we have to differentiate? As I told you, here's my passion. Why? It gets me in trouble. Why do we have to differentiate between mental health and physical health? Why is it okay to take medicine for one if you need it, and it's wrong or looked down upon or stigmatized to take medicine in the other area? And I guess it's because I've spent my life dealing with young people that this is, parents say, well, this is a parent issue. Well, then parent up. And newsflash to parents, I've taught and coached for more than 35 years. Your teenagers, no matter how good of a parent you are, seek advice from other adults. Because there are issues, whether they're talking to you about them or not. Probably they're not, because almost every lunch hour and before school and after school and before practice and after practice, I would have a teenager in my room or on the practice field say, Coach, you got a minute? I have something that I need to talk to you about because I can't talk to my parents about it. To the point that I had been teaching 16 years when my oldest became a teenager. And I looked at my wife and said, I sure hope she has somebody to talk to, like all the kids that came in my room. And to this day, I have thrice weekly conversations with both my daughters who are in their 30s. But when they were teenagers, they sought out other adults to talk to besides me. And I wanted them to, because I knew as a high school teacher and coach that young people seek out other adults to talk to. So I wanted to make sure they had somebody to talk to and didn't think, oh, because my parents are teachers, I don't need to talk to anybody else. All teenagers go out. So those of you out there saying, oh, that's a parent issue and we don't need mental health in the school because, the parents need to take care of that. Well, I'm telling you, whether you believe that or not, that's your opinion to believe it. But it's happening anyway. If you send your kid, if you have children and you send them out into the world, they are talking to other adults.
And I think a big part of that too, and it's so important because I think that it makes so many parents scared or upset. And it's understanding that you understand part of the reason that a lot of kids do that is because they love you, right? Because what do you fear when you love something? Losing it, right? It going away. And so when there's something that's a big, scary issue and a child doesn't know how their parent's going to take it, the instinct is not, let's test the waters and see what they're going to think. It's let's go talk to somebody else about it who, I can kind of gauge the reaction and the perception and see how that goes before I take the big leap into this. So I think sometimes it's understanding too that it's not a devious intent thing by the child. It's not like, sometimes it is, I don't want to talk to my parent because they're going to get mad at me. But I think a lot of times it's just because if a child doesn't know how their parent's going to react, they want to see how another adult or another person reacts first. That way they have a better idea of what to be ready for.
If they have a job, it could be an adult coworker.
Yeah.
If you go to church, it could be the youth minister or the pastor's wife or their Sunday school teacher. Or my point is
a coach.
What are you?
Teacher.
How are you going to keep them? This next article, in this school, there are parents who are saying, oh, I don't want my kids going anything like that. If the schools do this, I'm going to take them home and never put them in school. Okay. Newsflash again. Your teenager is still going to seek out other adults to talk to. Whether you let them talk to someone in school or you pull them out of the public school system, they're still going to seek other adults, be it a neighbor, be it a friend, be it an aunt or an uncle, or any of those other people that we've mentioned. It's a rite of passage. It's what we all, if you think back, it's what we all did.
Mental health in schools. Let's keep talking about it. Stay here on The State of Us, and we'll be right back. Mental health in our schools with our young people. I think part of the message, Lance, that comes to mind is, linking these two things, right? I think emotional overstatement absolutely plays into some of the mental health stuff that we're seeing. I think that social media is a huge part of why we are experiencing so much trouble with young people. I also think the positive of the fact that mental health is becoming less stigmatized, particularly among young people, more willing to openly discuss these problems, to talk about them, to think through them. That's a good thing, right? Because when they're shoved aside and when isolated, kids are likely to do things that are less responsible. At the same time, I think that's where everybody tries to boil it down to be too simple. There can be things that are increasing the reason that there are mental health problems, while it's also being simply more aware of the existence of those problems. Because I think that even if you took away social media, if it had never become part of the world, we'd still have young people with mental health problems.
Because we've always had them.
Well, and that was my point about, when you look at history and say, well, really, there were only the nuts and the crazies. And no, there were people. I mean, look at some of the greatest writers and poets of all time, right? They clearly had struggles in their own mind, trying to figure out things, trying to work through things. And I think we all do to an extent, which is why it goes back to mental health, physical health. You also, you talked about drugs and the stigma around that, but I think it's even more than just drugs, because we've talked a lot about the value on this show, especially over the past 3 years, of preventative physical health care, right? Things that keep you healthy rather than treat you once you're sick. We also know that it's much more affordable to spend preventative dollars than it is to spend simply treating. And the same thing, by the way, the same thing is true with mental health. It's literally the same exact thing in terms of the truth of the value of dollars.
Having someone to talk to and getting a hug or whatever is a lot cheaper than taking medicine.
Right. Well, and if as a young person, young people all struggle to a degree with their identity, right? Who am I? What do I want in the world? What do I want to become?
It's part of human nature, right? We're all trying to carve out our existence on this planet.
Yep.
Who am I? How am I going to get along with others? And how important am I going to be? And we fight and claw and struggle with that. And sometimes we get kicked down and we need somebody to help us pick us back up or whatever, or we just continue to fight, whatever our personality is. But we're all scratching and clawing all the time for our place in society.
The difference is, right, as a child, you don't yet have a profession. You've got this whole range of emotions coming on, starting somewhere around 12 to 14, typically. And then as you're headed, into adulthood, your brain's still developing. You're still learning all this stuff. You're trying to figure out what you're doing in your life. There's a lot of freaking stuff going on, a whole lot of change, a whole lot of development taking place. And that doesn't mean that because you're struggling, because you're down or because you have problems focusing, that doesn't mean you're going to struggle with those things your whole life. But if we provide resources when you're young to figure those things out, there's a much better chance that you actually won't have to deal with them your whole life. And when you encounter them in life, you'll be better equipped to overcome them. Pretending that they don't exist or shoving them into the background doesn't fix them. In fact, it almost assuredly makes them worse most of the time. The other thing, Lance, is to those parents, who are, well, this should strictly be handled at home. There's this idea, right, of how much should mental health be in schools? Should there be mental health resources at schools? I absolutely think so. Do I think there should also be more access to mental health services outside of school? Yes. There's a bigger conversation about what do we want schools to provide? But even if you set all that aside, I would contend to parents right now, if parenting was enough, then why do we have all these problems? Clearly, it's not enough on its own, or a good enough job is not being done. One of those two things. The percentages that we have and the struggles that we have shouldn't, if the contention is the solution is less mental health
and more parenting.
Okay, but are you ready to do more parenting? Because again, and that's not, I'm not claiming that our listeners aren't good parents. I'm just saying that to the people that have some of those hesitations, it's easy to say that, but just taking them out of it and then not providing anything else, well, that's not going to fix it,
But like I said, and I'm just reiterating here, whether you're doing a good job as a parent or not, doesn't mean your child is or is not struggling. At some point,
you could
do everything right as a parent
who have children that still struggle.
And
there are parents who are not very good who have children who are very exceptional and don't struggle much with mental health.
Right.
So yes, parenting certainly plays a role, but it's also that it's never and never always, right?
And there are chemical imbalances, and there are sometimes physical reasons and chemical reasons why these things are going on, and sometimes. To your point, I thought it was beautiful the way you put it, that you're afraid of losing your parents' love or their adoration or their affection because of a question you might have. And so you have to go somewhere for it. Where would you rather them go? They're not going to go to you because they don't know how you're going to react. And you say, well, I would always love my child. I would never. Okay, you may say that. You may even say that to your child. But there comes a point where does your child really, sometimes believe that because of all the different thoughts, all the different messages that they're receiving from the outside world, on their phone, on their computer, in the news.
And fear is very strong,
And especially when you're developing, right?
Yes.
And we're talking about adolescence.
Not necessarily thinking rationally.
And I just have to throw this in here not to take us down a rabbit hole.
Oh boy.
But with the food and the chemicals in our food that we've been eating, we are watching maturity levels starting to happen at 9 and 10 in young ladies. it doesn't, so their body is acting like an adult female, and their minds, you said 12 or 13. I'm thinking, 9, 10, 11 anymore with all the chemicals in our food and what the hormones and what it's doing to the bodies of our children. So, there's a whole nother issue there. Gosh, kids need everybody. They need multiple people to talk to help them navigate this, to become good, strong human beings.
Yep.
And that's where I think we fall short. Everybody thinks they have the answer. It takes all of us, folks, because you never know. And it doesn't mean that I can talk to everybody. Like I said, there were kids that came to me. There were kids that came to the English teacher down the hall. There were kids that went to the science teacher, who I thought was really weird, but there were kids who loved to talk to the science teacher. That's what we want. We want to surround our children with strong, loving adults who can help them when they seek the help that they need.
And connection is different too, right? That's, as you were just saying that, Lance, I think that's so important. You think back to your own parents, right? There was probably one of them that you were closer to maybe than the other.
Or felt more comfortable talking to.
Right. And that didn't mean that you didn't love the other parent. Didn't mean you didn't care for him, that you wouldn't fight for him, that you wouldn't do whatever needed to be done. And I think it's the same thing parents have to, who were once children themselves, have to think that same way about their child in terms of, you may love your child, and it's really hard probably to accept that you also may not be the best connection in every circumstance. And so the best thing is for them to find whatever that connection point is and to make use of that. And then you can still be there as a guiding force. But the other thing is, and I don't know how many times we talked about this, Lance, but oh man, it's so true. The harder you push, the less ground you will make. It is.
Amen.
It is that's just human nature. I'm sorry. That's not kids, adults. That's the whole, you can lead a horse to water, but you are not going to make it drink the water. So I think remembering that is just so crucial to this situation. Better for it to be available and it not be used than to be needed and not available. Why do we have this conversation today, Lance? What was the point?
Well, because we have a mission here at True Chat, and that is to educate people by providing honest, open, and respectful conversations. I think we did that today wonderfully. I was passionate, but I think respectful. At least I tried to be, especially after you read that definition of passion. But hopefully you enjoyed today's show and you share the information with others. And they say, well, this sounds like something that might, brighten my day. And they talk about things that I'm interested in. Tell them, well, they can find us as a podcast on Spotify, Overcast, Stitcher, Apple Podcast, and everywhere podcasts are found.
The State of Us is available as a podcast Tuesdays and Thursdays, first thing in the mornings. Those same episodes are heard on the weekends on AM and FM radio stations across the country. For The State of Us, I'm Justin T. Weller.
I'm Lance Jackson.
Special thanks to producer Bradley Butch. Thank you all. We'll see you next time. Be the change. Be sure to check out our website, thestateofus.org, for books, articles, and all the ways to tune in. thestateofus.org.